Hey everyone, welcome back to Fade to Fact, the channel where we dig into the wild, weird, and wonderful stories behind Hollywood's most memorable films. Today, we're heading to 1983 for one of the sharpest and funniest comedies of its era, Trading Places. On the surface, it's the ultimate odd couple setup. A pampered Wall Street snob and a hustler from the streets switch lives in a twisted social experiment. But beyond the laughs, the movie is a witty take on class, race, and greed in America, packed with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd at the top of their game. Directed by John Landis, Animal House, The Blues Brothers. It paired rising star Murphy fresh from 48 Hairs with comedy veteran Aykroyd. Add a razor-sharp script, Jamie Lee Curtis in a breakout comedic turn, and you've got lightning in a bottle. What's wild is that the story of Trading Places is almost as outrageous as the film, from alternate casting and improvised moments to an actual U.S. law nicknamed the Eddie Murphy Rule. So, grab your orange juice futures, watch out for gorilla suits, and let's jump into 20 things you never knew about Trading Places. 1. Eddie Murphy wasn't the first choice. It's hard to imagine Trading Places without Eddie Murphy, but he wasn't the original pick. The role of Billy Ray Valentine was initially offered to comedian Richard Pryor. Pryor, however, declined partly because of scheduling conflicts, and partly because Paramount was nervous about pairing him with Dan Aykroyd after their rocky experience filming Stir Crazy. The studio then turned to up-and-coming Eddie Murphy, fresh from his breakout in 48 Hers. Murphy brought his own improvisational flair, injecting lines and mannerisms that weren't in the script. His energy completely reshaped Billy Ray into the fast-talking, street-smart hustler audiences fell in love with. Landis later admitted that once Murphy came aboard, the film's comedic tone shifted in a fresher, more unpredictable direction. 2. The Dan Aykroyd rich guy transformation. Dan Aykroyd didn't just play Louis Winthorpe III, he studied the mannerisms of old money elites. Before filming, Aykroyd spent time in exclusive Philadelphia social clubs to observe how wealthy patrons carried themselves, from posture to speech patterns. He even worked with the costume department to ensure his suits looked custom-tailored, with details like monogrammed cuffs and high-end pocket squares. One of the most memorable touches? In the scene where Winthorpe hits rock bottom, Aykroyd insisted on wearing a filthy Santa Claus suit to exaggerate the fall from privilege. That grimy, disheveled Santa became one of the most iconic images in 80-second comedy. 3. The gorilla scene was even weirder behind the scenes. The outrageous final act aboard the train features a man in a gorilla suit and an actual live gorilla, and filming it was pure chaos. The real gorilla was played by a trained animal in an authentic costume headpiece to make it match the fake one. Actors reported that the train car smelled awful during shooting because of the combination of animal musk, fake fur, and intense lighting. Paul Gleason, who played Clarence Beeks, joked in interviews that the hardest part of his career was pretending to be terrified while sweating buckets inside a cramped gorilla suit. 4. The Duke brothers' names came from real people. Randolph and Mortimer Duke weren't named at random. Writers Timothy Harris and Herschel Weingrod took inspiration from actual wealthy financiers they'd read about in Wall Street Journal profiles. They wanted names that sounded both aristocratic and a little absurd. Interestingly, the Duke brothers would later pop up again in Eddie Murphy's Coming to America, 1988, in a cameo, revealing that the characters had gone bankrupt but were still scheming. That tiny crossover helped cement a shared universe long before Marvel made it cool. 5. The real Philadelphia Stock Exchange connection. Trading Places was one of the first major films to shoot inside the real Philadelphia Commodities Exchange. The production team negotiated special weekend access so they could film on the trading floor without disrupting business. Dozens of real traders were hired as extras, giving the chaotic orange juice futures climax its authentic feel. Some even improvised lines and hand signals they'd use in actual trading. Eddie Murphy later admitted he barely understood what was happening in those scenes. He just followed Landis's direction to look like you know exactly what you're doing. 6. The script was originally about rock stars. Before it became a tale of Wall Street versus the streets, the original concept for Trading Places was wildly different. The first draft revolved around two rock musicians whose fortunes are swapped as part of a publicity stunt. Studio executives liked the core switching lives premise, but felt the music industry setting was too niche. The writers retooled the story to focus on commodities trading, which felt timelier given the economic climate of the early 82nd. That change not only made the satire sharper but also allowed for the orange juice futures plotline, a quirky, very real commodity market that became central to the film's finale. 7. Jamie Lee Curtis nearly turned it down. Jamie Lee Curtis was known at the time for her horror roles, especially in Halloween and The Fog. Playing Ophelia, a savvy and self-assured sex worker, was a big departure. Curtis initially hesitated, worried that the comedic role might not be taken seriously and could damage her career trajectory. But John Landis convinced her that the character would be one of the smartest people in the film, ultimately outwitting the wealthy Duke brothers. The gamble paid off. Critics praised her performance, and it helped her break free from her Scream Queen typecasting. 8. Filming in the cold Philadelphia winter. Much of Trading Places was shot on location in Philadelphia during a bitterly cold winter. Exterior scenes, especially those set around Independence Hall and the city's historic district, were filmed in below-freezing temperatures. Cast and crew had to take frequent warm-up breaks between takes, and you can sometimes see the actor's breath in wide shots. The wintry backdrop wasn't planned, but it ended up adding an authentic seasonal feel to the film's holiday setting, something the production decided to embrace rather than fight against. 9. The film's title had several alternatives. Believe it or not, Trading Places wasn't the only title considered. Early production notes listed possible names like Black and White, Class Act, and A Matter of Class. Paramount marketing executives felt those titles were too on the nose and might limit audience appeal. Trading Places was chosen because it was catchy, ambiguous enough to spark curiosity, and conveyed both the literal and figurative swaps at the heart of the story. Dan Aykroyd later joked that if they'd gone with Black and White, we might have been stuck explaining the movie's message for the next 40 years. 10. Eddie Murphy's first ad-lib scene made the cut. One of Murphy's earliest scenes, pretending to be a Vietnam veteran with no legs, was heavily improvised. The script provided only a brief outline, but Murphy embellished the monologue with absurd, exaggerated details, including the bit about Agent Orange and his fake injuries. Landis loved it so much that he kept the entire take in the film. The crew reportedly struggled to hold back laughter, and even Aykroyd, watching from off-camera, admitted he nearly ruined the take by laughing out loud. 11. Aykroyd's perfectly stuffy accent. Dan Aykroyd developed Winthorpe's clipped, aristocratic accent by blending several old New England dialects. He reportedly listened to recordings of Boston Brahmin Society members and wealthy Connecticut families, then exaggerated certain vowel sounds for comedic effect. This wasn't just a performance flourish. Aykroyd even stayed in character during breaks, greeting crew members with overly formal phrases like, "Good day to you, sir," which cracked up Eddie Murphy every time. 12. The film sparked a real U.S. financial regulation. The climactic scene involving frozen, concentrated orange juice futures trading inspired a real change in U.S. law. In 2010, as part of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, Congress introduced what became known as the Eddie Murphy Rule. This regulation banned the use of non-public government information to trade commodities, essentially outlawing the very scam the Duke brothers try to pull off in the film. Lawmakers openly reference Trading Places in discussions, cementing its strange connection to real-world finance. 13. A real-life homeless shelter inspired a scene. For scenes showing Billy Ray's life before the Duke's experiment, the filmmakers took inspiration from actual homeless shelters in Philadelphia. Landis and the production team visited several facilities to study their layouts and atmosphere. Some extras in those scenes were actual shelter residents, paid for their time and given meals on set. Eddie Murphy later said that meeting them grounded his performance, making Billy Ray's later transformation feel more genuine. 14. A cameo from Landis regulars. John Landis often reused actors he enjoyed working with, and Trading Places is no exception. Look closely, and you'll spot Frank Oz, the voice of Yoda, and a Landis favorite as a police officer during Billy Ray's arrest. There's also a quick appearance by Jim Belushi, who would later co-star with Aykroyd in Red Heat. These cameos were uncredited at the time, adding to the fun of spotting familiar faces. 15. The Santa Claus scene was physically brutal. The infamous sequence where a drunken, disgraced Winthorpe wanders in a filthy Santa suit wasn't easy on Aykroyd. The shoot took place on an unusually warm winter day, meaning the heavy costume became unbearably hot under the lights. Aykroyd was also required to actually stuff smoked salmon into the Santa beard for one gag, and the oily fish smell lingered for hours. The actor later said that while audiences found it hilarious, filming it was the least glamorous day of my career. 16. The train sequence was shot on a real moving train. Instead of using a soundstage, Landis opted to film much of the New Year's Eve train party on an actual moving train car. This decision added realism but created logistical headaches. Props had to be secured between takes, and the noise made recording clean audio difficult. Actors sometimes had to loop their lines later in post-production, matching lip movements exactly. The swaying motion you see on screen is completely real, adding to the scene's chaotic energy. 17. The Duke's office was a real Philadelphia location. The Duke and Duke office interiors were filmed inside an actual historic building in Philadelphia's financial district. The ornate wood paneling, marble floors, and massive windows weren't set designs. They belonged to a real investment firm that allowed weekend filming. Crew members were warned not to touch any of the antique furniture, some of which was worth more than the film's costumes combined. 18. John Landis almost cut the gorilla ending. While the train sequence is now one of the most memorable parts of the film, Landis considered cutting the gorilla gag altogether. He worried it might be too absurd, breaking the tone of the story. Test audiences, however, roared with laughter, and the scene stayed in. Over time, it became one of the film's defining moments, showing just how far the plot was willing to go for a punchline. 19. Murphy and Aykroyd's chemistry was instant. Though they came from different comedy backgrounds, Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd clicked almost immediately during rehearsals. They developed an unspoken rhythm, often finishing each other's improvised lines and reacting in perfect sync. Crew members commented that their timing felt like they'd been performing together for years, which translated beautifully on screen. That chemistry is a big reason the film's jokes still land decades later. 20. The film's legacy in pop culture. Since its release, Trading Places has been referenced in everything from The Simpsons to Arrested Development. Lines from the movie are still quoted on Wall Street trading floors, and the concept of swapping lives to explore class divides has inspired numerous films and television episodes. For fans, it remains a perfect blend of sharp social commentary and laugh-out-loud comedy, a combination that few movies have matched since. And that's it, 20 facts showing how Trading Places became more than just a hit comedy. From Eddie Murphy stepping into Richard Pryor's shoes to Aykroyd enduring that infamous Santa suit, this film's behind-the-scenes stories are as colorful as the movie itself. It works because it blends sharp social satire with big laughs. The idea of switching lives feels timeless, and the chemistry between Murphy, Aykroyd, and Curtis keeps it fresh decades later. Few comedies inspire real legislation, but the Eddie Murphy rule did just that. Add in cameos, crossovers, and iconic scenes, and you've got a comedy that stood the test of time. Thanks for watching Fade to Fact. If you liked exploring Trading Places, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which classic you want next. And remember, in life's market, one bold move can change everything.